Hey everyone, I'm so glad you're here. Some stories start with a storm, but this one begins with a mother's courage, facing the snow, holding her son close, with nowhere to go and nowhere left to run. On the coldest night of her life, help comes from the last place she expects, a war-scarred stranger, a loyal German shepherd, and a kindness that melts more than just the snow. If you've ever wondered how hope survives when everything seems lost, this story is for you. Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you want to hear more stories about strength, family, and second chances, please hit like and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world and helps me bring you even more meaningful stories. Let's dive in. You ever notice how the world gets quiet before a storm, like it's holding its breath? That was the only warning Jessica Miller had before the first flakes began tumbling from the sky. Thick and relentless, swirling like ghosts through the main street of the tiny Oregon town she and her son, Ben, called home. At least until tonight. She pressed her hand against the frozen glass of their apartment window, watching as the landlord's pickup idled outside, headlights cutting cruel stripes through the falling snow. She could feel the cold leaching through the walls, could smell the sharp tang of fear in her son's shallow breaths behind her. "Mom, do we really have to go?" Ben's voice wobbled, trying so hard to be brave. He clutched his threadbare backpack, the straps chewed from years of use, the cartoon dinosaur faded by 1,000 washings. Jessica knelt beside him, her own hands trembling as she zipped his winter coat up to his chin. She didn't lie to him. Never had. "We do, honey, but it's only for tonight. We'll find somewhere warm." She tried to sound certain, but her words caught in the air, fragile as spun glass. Their landlord, Mr. Riggs, didn't bother hiding his impatience. He stood in the hallway, keys jangling, boots thumping, voice echoing. "You heard me, Jess. I gave you 2 weeks' notice. Ain't my fault you can't keep up. I need this place back tonight. Now get a move on." Jessica's cheeks burned, not from the cold, but from humiliation. Her pride felt as battered as their old suitcase, its zipper straining under the weight of everything she owned. She'd always paid on time, until the job at the diner dried up, until her cousin Eric, her supposed safety net, drained her savings with empty promises and paperwork she barely understood. But pride wouldn't keep Ben warm, so she swallowed it, looped her arm through his, and led him down the creaking stairs, each step echoing with the sound of their world getting smaller. Outside, the snow was deeper than she'd guessed. It swallowed their feet, sent icy needles through her thin boots. Ben shivered beside her, face pressed into her side, little hands white-knuckled on the suitcase handle. She gathered him close, pulling her scarf tighter, blinking back tears that froze before they could fall. "Please, Mom, I'm cold," Ben whimpered, his voice so small against the howl of the wind. Jessica forced a smile. "I know, baby. We just have to—" Her words trailed off as headlights swung onto the street, splashing over them in the storm. A battered old pickup truck rumbled past, the tires crunching over packed snow. In the passenger seat, a German shepherd, big, noble, fur dusted with gray, suddenly lunged up against the window. The dog barked and scratched frantically, nose steaming the glass, eyes locked on Jessica and Ben. The driver, a man with a stubbled jaw, the weight of old battles in his posture, glanced over, irritation flickering across his face. He looked ready to drive on, just another soul trying to outrun the storm. But the dog wouldn't let up. The animal's urgency grew, paws thumping, bark slicing through the winter hush. Jessica clung to Ben, unsure if she should wave or hide. Her heart pounded in her chest, hope and dread warring inside her. The truck slowed, brake lights flaring red in the swirling whiteout. The engine idled, rumbling like distant thunder. The driver's silhouette was tense, shoulders hunched, like a man wrestling with a decision. Finally, with a deep sigh, he killed the engine and swung the door open, boots crunching as he stepped out into the snow. He was tall, rugged, wrapped in a heavy army jacket with faded patches. His eyes were sharp but not unkind, taking in the scene with the quick assessment of someone who's seen trouble before. "You folks all right out here?" His voice was low, steady, commanding, but not harsh. Jessica hesitated, every instinct screaming at her not to trust strangers, but the cold was winning, and Ben was shivering violently now, his teeth chattering. She swallowed, forcing her words out. "Our landlord. He kicked us out. We have nowhere to go." The man's jaw tightened. He glanced at Riggs, who was now watching from the porch, arms folded, lips twisted into a sneer. "You kicked a woman and her kid out in this?" The man snapped, voice like gravel. Riggs shrugged, muttering something about not his problem, but the stranger wasn't listening anymore. The dog, Max, as the name on his collar read, slipped out of the cab, tail wagging despite the storm. He trotted straight to Ben, nudging the boy's frozen hand, pressing close to share his warmth. Ben's face crumpled with relief, the tension in his shoulders easing for the first time all night. Jessica's knees almost buckled. The kindness, so simple, so immediate, felt like an anchor in the storm. "Thank you," she whispered, not even sure who she was thanking. The man eyed them both, then jerked his chin toward the truck. "Get in, both of you. No arguments." His tone brooked no refusal. Jessica hesitated only a moment longer, then bundled Ben and their battered suitcase into the cab. The heat blasted their faces, melting snow from their hair and clothes. Max leapt in beside them, curling protectively around Ben. As the stranger climbed back in, he paused, eyes lingering on Jessica. There was something familiar there, an old grief, a promise surfacing in the firelight of memory. But neither spoke of it yet. Outside, the snow fell harder, erasing their footprints, swallowing the town in white. Inside the cab, Jessica clung to Ben as Max leaned into them, and for the first time that night, she allowed herself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, they weren't alone after all. The heat inside the battered pickup hit Jessica and Ben like a wave, sharp and overwhelming after the bitter cold. For a second, Jessica just sat there, shuddering, her hands frozen around Ben's shoulders. The storm howled outside, rattling the old truck's frame, but in here, there was the comforting hum of the heater and the steady, low panting of Max the German Shepherd, curled up protectively beside Ben. The driver's silence was thick as the snow falling outside. His gloved hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. The dim dash lights cast shadows over his face, making his eyes hard to read. Jessica risked a glance at him, searching for something, anything, that might tell her what came next. "Thank you for stopping," she finally managed, voice still brittle from cold and humiliation. "You didn't have to." He cut her off, voice flat but not unkind. "Nobody deserves to be out in this." His eyes flicked up to the rearview mirror. The landlord, Riggs, still loomed on the porch, phone pressed to his ear, scowling into the wind. The driver's jaw tensed. "Wait here." Without waiting for a reply, he slid out of the cab, the door slamming behind him. Max raised his head, alert, ears pricked as his owner stalked through the blowing snow straight toward Riggs. Jessica's heart hammered. She pressed Ben closer, whispering, "It's okay, honey. We're safe here. We're safe." She didn't know if it was true, but she needed Ben to believe it. Max nosed Ben's hand gently, then pressed his head into the boy's lap. Ben's shoulders began to relax, and he buried his fingers in the shepherd's thick fur. For the first time that night, his teeth stopped chattering. Outside, through the fogged windshield, Jessica watched the confrontation unfold. The stranger squared his shoulders, military straight, Jessica realized, and said something sharp. Riggs's face flushed red. He started waving his arms, but the stranger never flinched, just leveled him with a look that would have frozen boiling water. After a few more tense words, Riggs backed down, throwing up his hands in defeat. The stranger stood his ground until Riggs retreated inside and slammed the door. When he came back to the truck, he paused by Jessica's window, wiping the glass with his sleeve. "You need to grab anything else? I'll wait." Jessica's pride prickled. She wanted to say no, but she remembered the boxes left behind on the stoop. Papers, a couple of Ben's books, an old photo album. "Just a couple things. I'll be fast." He nodded, then surprised her by circling the truck and opening the door. "I'll help. Max, stay." The wind bit through her jacket as she stepped out. She could feel every eye on the street watching them. The curious, the cold, the judgmental. The stranger bent and scooped up the battered cardboard box in one arm, balanced a second under his elbow, and nudged her toward the truck with a gentle, "Go on. Ben needs you." She climbed back in, pulling Ben close. The stranger slid in beside them, setting the boxes in the back seat with a carefulness that made Jessica's throat tighten. Only once everything was secured did he put the truck in gear and pull away from the curb, the headlights dissolving into the blizzard. For a few miles, no one spoke. The only sounds were the windshield wipers creaking, the storm buffeting the truck, and Ben's slow, steady breaths as he finally drifted toward sleep in Max's warm embrace. Jessica studied the driver out of the corner of her eye. There was something familiar in his profile, in the way he checked the mirrors, the careful way he handled the wheel on icy roads. She felt a memory scratching at the back of her mind, a voice, a photograph from a lifetime ago, a name she hadn't spoken in years. "Thank you again," she said softly. "My name is Jessica, and this is Ben." The man nodded, glancing at her with a flash of recognition that caught her breath. "Mike Anderson." His voice was softer now. Max is human. We live up north, outside town. You're welcome to stay with us tonight. Nobody should be out in this, least of all a kid." Ben stirred, blinking awake at the sound of Mike's voice. He peered up at Mike, then at Max, who wagged his tail and licked Ben's cheek. For the first time all night, Ben smiled. A small, uncertain thing, but real. As the truck wound its way out of town, snow piling higher on the road's shoulders, Jessica felt a different kind of cold shiver through her, the chill of old grief. Because now, in the warm glow of the cab, she finally placed Mike's face. Not from town, but from an old photograph in a uniform, standing beside her late husband, Daniel, both grinning, young, alive. Her heart ached with the realization. You knew Daniel, didn't you?" Her voice barely rose above the hum of the heater. Mike's hands tightened on the wheel. He stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer, but then quietly he said, "He was my friend, my brother. I'm sorry about what happened, Jess. I made him a promise, a long time ago." There was an edge in his voice, a grief so raw it felt almost like anger. Tears prickled in Jessica's eyes, tears of pain and relief, loss and fragile hope. She wiped them away before Ben could see. Max whimpered softly, as if he understood, and nudged Ben closer to his mother. The air in the cab grew thick with old memories and new beginnings, with promises broken and maybe, just maybe, about to be rebuilt. Outside, the blizzard showed no sign of stopping, but inside that old pickup, something had shifted. Jessica still didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for tonight, she let herself believe that maybe, with Max and Mike, they had a fighting chance. The drive north was slow and nerve-wracking. The headlights struggled against the wall of falling snow, illuminating only the next few feet of the twisting road. Branches sagged under the weight of ice. The town's last streetlight disappeared behind them, swallowed by the storm. Every mile farther from town, Jessica's anxiety grew. Every minute, her need to appear strong for Ben pressed harder against her chest. Mike's pickup bounced over a rutted lane, finally crunching to a stop outside a small log cabin, half hidden by towering pines and a bank of snow nearly up to the windowsills. There was no neighbor in sight, just the wind rattling through the trees and the crunch of Max's paws as he jumped down, ears pricked. "Come on, let's get inside," Mike said, swinging open the door and reaching for the boxes in the back seat. Jessica hesitated. Something about the place, the dark, the silence, the wildness, made her skin prickle with nerves. But Ben was shivering, his nose pink, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. She squeezed his hand, hoisted her bag, and followed Mike toward the porch, snowflakes swirling in the porch light's dim glow. Inside, the cabin was cold, but not lifeless. Mike moved fast, stacking their boxes by the door, then flipping on a battered lamp and setting logs in the wood stove. Soon, the stove's fire crackled, shadows dancing on knotty pine walls lined with old army photos, faded postcards, and the occasional muddy paw print. "Take your boots off by the door," Mike called, tossing a thick blanket over the back of the worn sofa. "Hang your coats on the hooks. Dry 'em out. I'll get some cocoa started." His movements were brisk, practiced. Max trotted from one room to another, tail wagging, watching the newcomers with an alert, almost protective gaze. Jessica helped Ben out of his layers. She felt clumsy and awkward, painfully aware of every threadbare spot on her jeans, the stains on Ben's gloves. She wrapped him in the blanket, rubbing his arms. Ben pressed close to her side, looking around the cabin, eyes wide and cautious. "It's okay, sweetheart. We're inside now," Jessica whispered, running a hand through his hair. She tried to sound calm, but her nerves jangled. Pride warred with gratitude. She was grateful, deeply, but it stung to accept charity, to be someone's burden. Mike returned with 2 steaming mugs, setting them gently on the low table. "Here, cocoa and a little honey. Got it from a neighbor up the road. He keeps bees." His face softened as he knelt beside Ben. "Max'll keep you company, little man. He's good at that." Ben managed a small smile, shrinking into the blanket. Max curled beside him, resting his huge head on Ben's knee. The dog's calm presence worked a kind of magic. Ben's breaths deepened, the tension in his little body slowly melting. The hush inside the cabin was as thick as the snow outside. Jessica listened to the wind moan through the eaves, the pop of sap in the fire, the occasional jingle of Max's collar as he shifted. Each sound felt amplified by the isolation, by the distance from town, from help, from any certainty about the future. She realized Mike was watching her, a question in his eyes. You okay? Jessica nodded too quickly. Yeah, thank you, Mike. This is... She swallowed. You didn't have to help us. I know we're... I know it's a lot. Mike shook his head. I made a promise to a friend. I help when I can. He hesitated, then sat on the arm of a battered chair, elbows on knees. You're not alone, Jess. Not here. That was almost too much. Jessica looked away, blinking back a sudden sting of tears. She was tired. So tired. But she wouldn't cry in front of Ben. Instead, she cleared her throat, changing the subject. This place is... nice. Quiet. You live out here alone? Mike shrugged. Just me and Max. Suits us. His gaze flicked to an old photo on the mantel. Two soldiers, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning. Jessica recognized Daniel, her late husband. Her heart squeezed. There were no family photos in her own suitcase, just memories, and grief she tried not to let Ben see. The hours dragged as the storm raged. Ben sat with Max, silent but finally calm enough to sip cocoa, his fingers tangled in the dog's fur. Jessica perched by the stove, holding her mug with both hands, drawing strength from its warmth. Every so often, Ben glanced at the door, as if expecting someone to burst in and tell them to leave again. Each time Max nudged him with his nose, licking his hand, grounding him in the present. Slowly, the boy's eyes grew heavy, and he laid his head on Max's back, breathing deep. Jessica felt her shoulders sag, exhaustion settling into her bones. Still, her pride gnawed at her. She wanted to offer something in return, a chore, a meal, a story, but Mike shook his head whenever she tried to stand. Rest. That's what you can do for me tonight. Later, with Ben asleep and Max curled protectively at his side, Jessica let herself drift. She stared into the fire, shadows flickering over her face, memories swirling like the snow outside. She thought of Daniel, of their old life, of promises broken and made anew, of the cruel luck that left her here, with only a battered suitcase and her son. A floorboard creaked. Mike stood nearby, a second blanket in hand. You take the bed tonight. I'll crash out here with Max. Storm's not letting up. No point in worrying until morning. His tone left no room for argument. Jessica started to protest, but the words tangled in her throat. Pride and gratitude warred again, and this time, gratitude won. Thank you, Mike. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. Mike nodded, lingering in the firelight. You're safe here, both of you, I promise. Outside, the wind howled and the snow drifted higher, but in the little cabin, Jessica closed her eyes. For the first time in weeks, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they would survive this storm, together. Snow fell through the night, thick and endless, swallowing up the world outside. Morning came reluctantly, a faint gray glow seeping in through the frosted windows. For the first time in days, Jessica woke without the bone-deep ache of anxiety pulsing through her chest. The warmth of a real bed was almost shocking, the quilt heavy over her shoulders. For a moment, she allowed herself the luxury of pretending everything was normal, that she was waking up in a life that hadn't been upended by tragedy and betrayal. But then she heard Ben's laughter, muffled but unmistakable, and reality slipped quietly back in. She sat up, rubbing sleep from her eyes. The room was still, but the scent of brewing coffee and the muffled thud of Max's paws told her the world had already begun without her. Jessica padded softly into the living room. She found Ben crouched on the floor by the wood stove, giggling as Max rolled onto his back, huge paws waving in the air. Mike sat at the kitchen table pouring coffee into mismatched mugs, his movements unhurried but alert, like he'd been up for hours. "Morning," he said quietly, glancing up at her. His voice was soft, but she could hear the tension lurking under the calm. Jessica wrapped her arms around herself, uncertain, hovering by the door. Ben looked up, face shining. "Mom! Max knows how to shake hands." He grinned, demonstrating as the big shepherd obediently offered a paw. "That's great, honey," Jessica said, managing a genuine smile for the first time in what felt like years. She sat on the worn sofa, tucking her feet underneath her, watching Ben and Max play. For a while, she allowed herself to simply be just a mother, just a witness to her son's joy. Mike set a mug of coffee on the table beside her, then retreated to the kitchen, busying himself with breakfast. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken questions, with the memories that pressed at the edges of the morning like shadows. Finally, Jessica broke the quiet. "You said you made Daniel a promise," she murmured, staring into her coffee. Mike stiffened. For a moment it seemed like he might not answer, but then he sighed, settling onto the chair across from her. "Yeah. We were in the same unit. Afghanistan, 2007. We watched each other's backs. When he got that letter from you, about Ben coming, I promised I'd look out for him. He never stopped talking about you, Jess. Said he couldn't wait to see his boy." Jessica's throat tightened. She pressed a hand to her lips, staring at the floor. "He didn't make it back," she whispered. "I always thought, if he'd had someone with him, maybe—" Mike shook his head sharply, pain flashing in his eyes. "You can't think like that. None of us could have saved him. But I should have come sooner. I owed him that much." Jessica blinked hard, fighting tears. "It's not your fault, Mike. You did more than most." She tried to swallow her hurt, but the words tumbled out anyway. "I thought, after Daniel died, I thought family would help. My cousin, Eric, he said he'd look after us, help with the money Daniel left. But he lied. He forged papers, stole what little we had left. I tried to fight it, but nobody listened." Mike's jaw clenched. "That's why Riggs was able to throw you out?" Jessica nodded. "Eric made sure my name was off everything. I was desperate and he took advantage. Then he just disappeared." She exhaled, trembling with humiliation. "I can't believe I let it happen." Mike's expression softened. "He's the one who should be ashamed, not you." The words sat between them, heavy and raw. Max seemed to sense the tension. He left Ben's side to nudge Jessica's knee, leaning his big head against her leg. She stroked his fur, letting his warmth ground her. For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of the stove and Ben's quiet, happy humming as he traced circles in the frost on the window. Jessica took a shaky breath, forcing herself to look Mike in the eye. "I want to stand on my own 2 feet, but I don't even know where to start anymore. I'm tired, Mike. Tired of being afraid, tired of asking for help." Mike nodded slowly, his own grief flickering in the firelight. "I get it. After I got back, I locked myself out here with Max. Told myself I didn't need anybody. But you can't live like that forever." He looked at Ben, who was now drawing pictures in the frost. Tiny stick figures. One tall, one small. A big dog beside them. Mike smiled, bittersweet. "He's a good kid. Daniel would be proud." Jessica blinked fast, tears threatening again. She wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater, embarrassed. Ben turned, holding up his drawing. "Look, Mom, it's us. And Max, too." Jessica managed a wobbly smile. "It's perfect, sweetie." Ben's shoulders, which had been hunched in tension since the night before, finally relaxed. He scooted closer to Max, laying his head on the shepherd's back. "I wish Daddy could see us," he whispered. Jessica swallowed, her voice thick. "Me too, baby." Max licked Ben's ear, making him giggle, a high, clear sound that chased the last of the night's sorrow from the room. Mike watched them for a moment, then spoke, voice steady with new resolve. "You're not in this alone, Jess. I made Daniel a promise, and I intend to keep it. I'll help however I can. We'll figure out what Eric did, and we'll fight it. You have my word." Jessica met his gaze, searching for any sign of pity or judgment, but found only quiet determination. A fragile hope flickered in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, things could change. "Thank you, Mike," she said softly, her words carrying more meaning than she could express. Mike nodded, his eyes shining in the morning light. It's what family does. For the first time in a long while, Jessica allowed herself to believe it might be true. The storm eased by afternoon, but the world outside the cabin was buried under drifts taller than Ben. The sky was an unforgiving steel gray, clouds hanging low over the pines. Mike had already shoveled a rough path to the truck, just in case, but otherwise, the world felt like it had shrunk to the four walls of the cabin and the people inside. Jessica tried to focus on normal things, making lunch, helping Ben with his reading, folding their clothes by the wood stove. But her mind kept circling back to Eric, the betrayal still raw. Each time she looked at Ben, so trusting, so resilient, her determination hardened. She wouldn't let Eric steal their future without a fight. Mike noticed the change in her. That evening, after Ben fell asleep curled up with Max near the fire, Mike poured them each a mug of tea and sat across from Jessica at the scarred kitchen table. "We can't let him get away with this," Jessica said, the words coming out sharper than she meant. Mike nodded. "We won't, but we'll have to be smart. If he forged documents, there's a trail. And I know someone who can help." He leaned back, pulling out his old Army-issued cell phone, a battered thing with cracked edges and a faded unit sticker. "My friend Tom, he's a lawyer now. Knows his way around fraud cases. I'll call him." Jessica hesitated, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. Will he even care? It's not like we have anything left to fight with. Mike looked her dead in the eye. "You have more than you think, Jess. And you have me." She managed a small smile, tired, but grateful. The firelight threw their shadows tall against the cabin's walls as Mike punched in the number. Tom answered on the second ring, his voice gruff but warm. "Anderson, haven't heard from you since the last reunion. You in trouble?" "Not me," Mike replied. He explained the situation. Jessica, the eviction, Eric's fraud, the missing documents. Tom listened, his tone turning serious. "Sounds like you've got a real snake on your hands. Here's what I need. Anything with Eric's signature, any bank records, emails, paperwork. And Jess, don't let yourself believe it's hopeless. I've seen worse. We'll start by digging through what you've got. Then I'll check county records from my end." After Mike hung up, Jessica felt a flicker of hope, a small, stubborn light in the darkness. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I never thought anyone would take us seriously." "Tom's a good man," Mike assured her, "and Max won't rest until this is right either." He ruffled the dog's fur, earning a tail thump in response. The next morning, the hunt began in earnest. They dug through every box Jessica had managed to save. Old bills, faded photographs, worn notebooks. The process was grueling and frustrating. Most of her important paperwork had vanished in the weeks before the eviction, no doubt misplaced by Eric or swept away when Riggs tossed them out. Ben, bored but wanting to help, took it upon himself to organize the boxes, sorting piles of envelopes and papers into neat stacks. Max stayed close, lying beside Ben, his warm body a constant comfort when the wind rattled the windows. Sometimes Jessica would pause, hands shaking, when she came across a photo of Daniel, his smile wide and easy, Ben perched on his shoulders. Mike always noticed, giving her space but keeping his silent promise to help. They worked in shifts, taking breaks when Ben's nightmares woke him crying, lost in dreams where he was cold, alone, and his mother was gone. Each time Max would clamber onto the bed, pressing his massive head into Ben's chest until the boy's sobs faded. Jessica would sit beside them, stroking her son's hair, her own heart breaking and healing at the same time. On the third day, a new blow struck. Mike's phone buzzed with an email, an official notice from Eric's attorney, threatening legal action if Jessica continued to harass the family. It was pure intimidation, meant to scare her into silence. Jessica read the message, her hands trembling, and shoved the phone across the table. "He's not going to stop. He wants to ruin us completely." Mike's jaw set. "He's trying to scare you. That means he's worried. But what if we lose? What if Ben and I end up with nothing?" Jessica's voice wavered, the old fear creeping in. Mike reached across the table, his hand warm and steady. "Listen to me. I've been in worse spots. We won't let him win. And you're not alone. Not anymore." The warmth in his voice and the firmness of his grip steadied her. Max came over, sensing the tension, and rested his head on Jessica's knee, dark eyes full of calm assurance. That night, Jessica found herself unable to sleep. She wandered the cabin, heart pounding. In the fire's flickering glow, she caught a glimpse of herself in the window, a woman haunted but not beaten, a mother still fighting for her child. She checked on Ben. He was tangled in blankets, Max pressed against his side, the dog's rhythmic breathing a lullaby. For the first time, Ben's face was peaceful, his mouth relaxed in sleep. Jessica knelt and kissed his forehead, then slipped back to the kitchen. She sat across from Mike, who was bent over a pile of papers, brow furrowed in concentration. He looked up, exhaustion etched deep in his features, but smiled when he saw her. "We'll find it, Jess," he promised. "We'll find something." She nodded, and for the first time in months, allowed herself to hope, not just for survival, but for justice. The cabin felt warmer that night, filled with the fragile strength of a family coming together, determined not to let the storm or the past decide their fate. The snowstorm seemed never-ending, its icy breath pressing relentlessly against the cabin windows day after day. Time took on a strange, dreamlike quality, hours stretching and folding as Jessica and Mike combed through every scrap of paper, every faded envelope, every old shoebox in search of anything that could undo Eric's theft. The wind outside rattled the eaves and set the branches creaking, but inside the cabin, there was a steady determination. They would not give up. It was the fourth evening of their search. Ben, exhausted by the tense days and interrupted sleep, had curled up in a pile of blankets beside the stove, Max draped protectively across his feet. Jessica and Mike sat at the kitchen table surrounded by piles of documents. Jessica's eyes ached from reading, her fingertips numb from leafing through so many old bills and bank statements that seemed to lead nowhere. She was about to suggest they pause for the night when Max suddenly lifted his head, ears perked, gaze locked on the mudroom door that led out to the storage shed. He whined softly, then stood up and nudged Ben awake, tail wagging with anxious energy. "Easy, Max," Mike murmured, but the shepherd wouldn't be still. He circled the door, barking once, sharp and urgent. Jessica looked at Mike, hope flickering in her tired eyes. "What's out there?" "Just the old storage shed," Mike said, grabbing a flashlight and shrugging on his coat. "Never used it much. Some boxes from when I first moved in. A few old tools. Maybe a mouse got in and Max smells it." Still, the dog's insistence had a different edge. A focused drive Jessica hadn't seen before. She threw her coat over her pajamas and followed Mike outside, the cold shocking her awake. Ben scrambled after them, barefoot in the snow but too excited to care. The wind bit their faces as Mike shoved open the shed's door. Inside, the air was even colder, the shadows thick and deep. Max darted ahead, nose to the floor, tail high, barking with renewed urgency. He pawed at a battered cardboard box nearly hidden behind a stack of firewood. Mike aimed his flashlight at the box. "That's been there for years," he muttered, pushing aside the firewood. He knelt, dragging the box into the weak circle of light. The cardboard was damp, edges curled from old moisture and cold. Max whimpered and scratched at the lid, his tail thumping faster. Jessica's heart raced. She knelt beside Mike, hands trembling as she lifted the top. Inside, the box was a chaotic mess. Faded photographs, water-stained notebooks, envelopes warped by time. For a moment, it looked like more of the same, another dead end. But Max nosed aside a pile of yellowed receipts, pawing at a dark blue folder wedged at the bottom. Mike fished it out, careful not to tear the brittle cover. Jessica's breath caught as he flipped it open. Inside were official-looking documents, stamped and signed, bank forms, legal notices, old correspondence from Daniel's life insurance. And there, in the middle, a set of forms with Eric's signature, his name in that familiar, arrogant scrawl next to lines that should have been Jessica's. Jessica's hands flew to her mouth. Tears stung her eyes, freezing on her cheeks as she realized what they'd found. "Mike, this is it. This is everything we need." Her voice broke with disbelief and relief. Ben hovered at her side, peering at the folder, eyes wide. "Did Max find the treasure, Mom?" Jessica laughed, a wild, shaky sound. She threw her arms around Max, hugging the shepherd so fiercely he let out a surprised yelp before licking her cheek. "He found something better than treasure," she whispered, burying her face in his fur. "He found hope." Mike shuffled through the documents, scanning page after page. "This is more than enough," he said, his voice shaking with excitement and a touch of awe. "There's proof Eric forged the transfer. The dates match up with when you lost access. And look, correspondence from the bank, warning about suspicious activity." Jessica couldn't stop crying. Months of helplessness, fear, and humiliation poured out in great, shuddering sobs. Mike placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. For a moment, the cabin's struggles, the snowstorm's roar, and all the betrayals seemed to fade, replaced by the pure, dizzying rush of possibility. "We have to get this to Tom," Mike said, urgency sharpening his tone. "Tonight. He can start building a case as soon as he sees these." Jessica wiped her tears, nodding fiercely. "I'll do whatever it takes. I'm not letting Eric win." Mike's military focus took over. He snapped pictures of the documents on his phone and fired off a text to Tom, who replied almost instantly. "Bring the originals. I'll meet you at the courthouse at first light. You have a real shot now, Jess. Don't let that bastard spook you." Outside, the storm had begun to taper, but the roads would still be treacherous. Mike packed the documents in a waterproof bag double-checking each page, then bundled Ben into his warmest clothes. Jessica hugged Max again, whispering her thanks into his fur. The dog basked in her praise, tail wagging so hard it nearly knocked over the lamp. The drive into town was slow and harrowing. Snowdrifts blocked half the road, and the truck fishtailed on hidden ice. Jessica sat tensely in the passenger seat, clutching the folder to her chest, while Ben dozed in the back. Max pressed close against him for warmth and reassurance. The world outside was a silent, frozen maze, the headlights cutting tunnels through the dark. But inside the cab, something new burned, a stubborn flame of hope, kindled by loyalty, by courage, by the unexpected heroism of a dog who refused to give up on family. As the town's lights finally shimmered into view, Jessica felt the weight of the last few months begin to lift. For the first time since Daniel's death, since Eric's betrayal, she could see a path forward. And it started with Max, with Mike, with the simple, stubborn promise to never let the people you love freeze in the dark. Dawn in town arrived pale and cold, the courthouse steps buried in ankle-deep snow. The storm had finally passed, but the world was still silent, every branch and street lamp sheathed in shimmering ice. Mike's pickup rumbled into the parking lot, tires crunching over frozen ruts. Jessica stared out the window, nerves stretched thin as piano wire. Her breath fogged the glass, the folder of documents pressed tight to her chest. Ben sat between her and Mike, bundled in every layer Jessica could find. Max rode shotgun in the back seat, tail wagging, nose pressed to the window, as if he sensed something important was about to happen. Mike parked as close to the doors as he could, then turned to Jessica, his voice steady and warm. "You ready?" Jessica swallowed, trying to find words. I think so." Her hands trembled, but there was steel in her spine now, forged by the last few days. "Doesn't matter if you are or you aren't," Mike replied with a half-smile. "You're doing it anyway." Jessica managed a laugh, a real one, bright and shaky. She squeezed Ben's hand. "Let's go, buddy. Max, stay close." Inside, the courthouse was already buzzing. News of Jessica's fight had spread through the little town. People she barely knew nodded encouragement or whispered, "Good luck, Jess," as she walked past. The hearing was scheduled for 9 o'clock, and by 8:30 the benches were nearly full. Neighbors, teachers, even some of Mike's old army buddies. The room was charged, every eye flicking between Jessica and the empty seat reserved for Eric. Eric arrived late, flanked by a sharp-suited lawyer. His eyes darted around the courtroom, searching for a friendly face and finding none. He sneered at Jessica as he passed, but the expression faltered when he saw Mike and Max on either side of her, Ben watching with quiet defiance. Jessica's heart hammered in her chest, but she held her chin high. She would not look away, not today. Max, sensing her tension, pressed his head against her knee, eyes steady and full of wordless reassurance. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and piercing eyes, entered and called the room to order. Tom, Mike's friend, sat beside Jessica at the plaintiff's table, his manner calm but fierce. He gathered the evidence Max had found and handed it to the clerk, then leaned in to whisper, "You're the strongest person here. Just tell the truth." The proceedings began. Eric's lawyer did everything possible to cast doubt, questioning signatures, suggesting Jessica had misunderstood the paperwork, hinting that she was simply bitter and out for revenge. Jessica felt her face flush with shame, but she forced herself to remember every night spent searching, every humiliation, every promise she'd made to Ben. When it was her turn to testify, Jessica stood, hands only slightly trembling. She spoke plainly about Daniel's death, about her trust in Eric, about the missing money and the desperate nights that followed. When she faltered, she looked at Ben, then at Max, and drew strength from their unwavering presence. "I never wanted to fight my own family," she finished softly. "But my son deserves a future, and my husband deserved better than to have his sacrifice dishonored. All I want is what Daniel left us, and for the truth to matter." Ben reached out, fingers finding Max's thick fur. The dog looked up, as if to say, "You're not alone." The courtroom was silent. Everyone, even the judge, listening with quiet respect. Then it was Eric's turn. He spoke smoothly, but the cracks showed. Tom's cross-examination was merciless. He presented the forged documents, the bank statements, the suspicious withdrawals. The judge pressed Eric hard, her voice like ice. "You expect this court to believe your cousin manufactured this evidence? That she forged her own name to lose her own inheritance?" Eric sputtered, eyes darting around the room for an ally. But there were none. The community had seen enough. From the back of the courtroom, a woman, Jessica's old neighbor, stood up and said, "Eric lied to all of us. We deserve the truth." A murmur of support rippled through the benches. Even the judge seemed moved. When the testimony was over, she called a brief recess, then returned with her decision. The courtroom held its breath as the judge spoke. "This court finds in favor of Jessica Miller. The evidence of fraud is overwhelming. Ms. Miller, your inheritance is hereby restored. Mr. Eric Waller, your actions were not only illegal but reprehensible. I am referring this case to the district attorney for prosecution." Jessica heard the words, but for a moment couldn't process them. Ben leapt up, flinging his arms around her. Max barked, a booming, joyful sound that filled the chamber. Mike grinned, wrapping Jessica in a warm, awkward hug that threatened to break her in two. Around them, the room erupted in applause. People clapped, cheered, even wiped away tears. Eric stormed out, his lawyer in tow, vanishing like a bad dream in the morning light. Jessica, trembling, sat heavily on the bench, overwhelmed by relief. She felt the past months, the fear, the shame, the exhaustion, begin to melt away, replaced by something she hadn't felt in a long time: pride. Ben looked up at her, eyes shining. "Does this mean we get to go home?" Jessica knelt in front of him, tears streaking her cheeks. "It means we get to build a new home, sweetheart. A better one." Max pressed close, his tail thumping, as if to say he'd be there every step of the way. Mike squeezed Jessica's shoulder. "You did it. You really did." Jessica smiled at him, at Ben, at Max, and finally at the community gathered around her. "No," she said quietly. "We did." As they left the courthouse, the sun broke through the clouds, glittering off the snow. A promise that the hardest part of winter was finally behind them, and spring wasn't far off. The drive back from the courthouse was quiet, almost reverent. Snow sparkled in the sunlight, trees casting long shadows over fields that just a day ago seemed endless and unforgiving. Now the world shimmered with possibility. Jessica held Ben's hand all the way home, neither needing to speak. Ben gazed out the window, humming softly to himself, every so often glancing at Max, who sat upright in the back seat, ears perked, tail swishing slowly across the seat. Mike didn't rush. The urgency that had fueled him through days of worry and late-night phone calls was gone, replaced with a deep, satisfied calm. He watched Jessica in the rearview mirror, her face no longer drawn with fear, but soft with relief, eyes brighter than he'd ever seen. When they reached the cabin, the sun was high, melting icicles from the eaves. The path Mike had shoveled days ago was nearly gone, erased by the thaw. Inside, the cabin was filled with late winter light. Ben bounded inside, Max hot on his heels, both stopping in the middle of the living room, as if unsure what to do with so much space, so much peace. Jessica stepped inside slowly, taking it all in. She turned in a slow circle, seeing the cabin anew, the warmth of the wood stove, the simple comfort of the sofa, even the scratches on the old pine floor where Max had slid across in his excitement. It wasn't just shelter from the storm anymore. It was home, maybe not forever, but home enough to begin healing. Mike set a pot of coffee on the stove and sat down at the kitchen table, exhaustion catching up with him. He watched as Jessica unpacked the bag she'd carried through so much. The folder of documents, Ben's favorite book, a small framed photo of Daniel that had survived Eric's sabotage. She set the picture on the mantel, and for a moment, everyone in the room seemed to pause, honoring the man whose love and sacrifice had set all of this in motion. After a while, Jessica sank onto the sofa, Ben curling up at her side. Max flopped onto the rug with a satisfied groan, rolling onto his back so Ben could rub his belly. Laughter bubbled up, soft at first, then louder, spilling into the corners of the cabin. Mike caught himself grinning, the sound lifting something in his chest that had been heavy for years. Later, over bowls of hot soup, they talked. Really talked. Not just about what had happened, but about what it meant. Jessica confessed her fear of depending on others, the shame that had crept in after Daniel's death, and the pain of losing trust in her own family. She admitted that some nights she'd almost given up. Mike nodded, stirring his soup, his eyes thoughtful. Everybody breaks sometimes. That's what the world does to you if you let it. But it doesn't mean you have to stay broken. Ben listened closely, his fingers tracing the rim of his bowl. Does that mean we're a family now? He asked quietly. Jessica hugged him close. Yes, honey, we're a family. Maybe not the kind we used to be, but a real one all the same. Mike smiled, a deep, genuine thing that reached his eyes. Family's not always about blood. Sometimes it's about who stays with you when everything else falls apart. Max barked softly, as if to add his agreement, and Ben burst out laughing, the sound ringing with pure joy. As dusk fell, the cabin glowed with firelight. Jessica and Mike sat together on the sofa, Ben dozing between them, Max curled up at their feet. Outside, the last of the snow softened the world to a hush, but inside, warmth radiated, so much more than heat. It was the warmth of trust earned back, of burdens shared, of wounds slowly healing. Jessica looked around the cabin, her heart full. She realized the real shelter she'd found wasn't just these sturdy walls. It was the loyalty of a friend who kept an old promise, the unshakable love of a child, and the steady devotion of a dog who refused to let them freeze alone. She thought of everything she'd lost, her husband, her home, her confidence, and understood now that shelter isn't just a roof. It's the people and animals who stand by you through every storm. It's having the courage to hope again, even when hope feels impossible. Mike, seeing the distant look in her eyes, nudged her gently. You know what I've learned through all this? She smiled, wiping a tear from her cheek. What? That sometimes the only way to keep going is to let somebody else carry you for a while. And sometimes you've got to be the one who carries them. Jessica nodded, thinking of the long nights when Mike's quiet strength had been all that kept her from falling apart. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for believing in us." Mike squeezed her hand. "You made it easy, Jess. You never stopped fighting." Later, as they prepared for bed, Jessica tucked Ben in, brushing hair from his forehead. "You were so brave," she told him. "I'm proud of you." Ben blinked sleepily. "I wasn't brave all the time. Sometimes I was really scared." Jessica smiled, kissing his forehead. "That's what makes you brave, sweetheart. Being scared, but doing it anyway." Max curled up on the foot of Ben's bed, keeping his silent, steadfast watch. That night, for the first time in months, everyone in the little cabin slept soundly. Outside, the snow continued to melt, and somewhere in the woods, a creek ran free beneath the ice, reminding them all that even after the longest, coldest storms, life always finds a way to begin again. When the blizzard ended, it was as if the entire town emerged from hibernation. Neighbors came out with shovels and laughter, knocking ice off mailboxes and clearing paths. Word of Jessica's victory and the truth about Eric's betrayal spread like wildfire, not just as gossip, but as a story of hope and second chances. At first, Jessica was embarrassed by the attention. Strangers approached her at the market, offering hugs, fresh-baked bread, or even just a quiet, "I'm proud of you." She heard her name in whispered conversations at the post office, saw children point out Max and Ben on the street. Some part of her wanted to hide, but another part, the braver part, knew that her story was now bigger than herself. Ben noticed it too. The boy who'd once hidden behind Jessica's coat now walked with his head held higher, Max by his side like a guardian angel in fur. At school, classmates who had once kept their distance now invited Ben to play in the snowdrifts, asking endless questions about Max, the snow dog who saved a family. Jessica began to realize that everything she, Mike, and Ben had endured was not just a burden. They were proof that standing up for yourself could inspire others to do the same. People she'd never met came forward with their own stories. A widowed mother who'd lost her job, a veteran quietly battling old wounds, a young woman fighting for custody of her children. Each told Jessica, in hushed voices, that her fight had made them feel less alone. One day, after church, a group of local women approached Jessica as she and Ben sipped cocoa in the rec hall. Their faces were gentle, their voices shy at first. "Would you ever think about starting a support group?" one asked. "A place for people like us, who've been knocked down but aren't done fighting?" Jessica hesitated, the old fears flickering in her chest. Who was she to lead? But Mike, who stood nearby talking with the pastor, caught her eye and gave her a subtle, encouraging nod. "I'd love to," Jessica finally replied, her voice steady. "Nobody should have to go through it alone." The first meeting was held in the town library, a handful of women sitting in a circle, hands wrapped around mugs of tea. Jessica told her story, not the polished version, but the real one, with all its messy heartbreak and hope. Others followed. Stories of loss and betrayal, yes, but also of survival and strength. They laughed, cried, and for the first time in a long while felt seen. Ben found his own kind of courage. Inspired by his mom, he became the unofficial leader of his class's outdoor club, inviting kids who were often left out to join him and Max in games after school. Max relished the attention, barking joyfully as he herded children through the snow, accepting ear scratches and belly rubs from anyone who offered. Mike, too, found his heart opening. He began volunteering at the local outreach center, helping other veterans with paperwork, offering rides to those stranded by winter storms. At first, he did it quietly, not wanting any recognition. But as he listened to others share their stories, he realized how much it meant, how even the smallest act of kindness could change a day or a life. As weeks passed, Max's legend grew. Townsfolk began calling him the Snow Dog, and his story made it into the local paper. People left treats at the cabin gate, and children begged for the chance to walk with him and Ben on weekends. For the first time since Daniel's death, laughter and warmth filled Jessica's life, not just within the cabin, but spreading out into the community like the ripples of a stone dropped in a pond. It wasn't just about justice, Jessica realized one evening as she sat by the fire. Ben curled up beside her, Mike reading the paper, and Max snoring at their feet. It was about belonging, about knowing that their suffering, their fight, had made a difference. Just as a single snowflake can start an avalanche, one act of courage can transform many lives. It showed in small ways, the way neighbors checked on each other when the next snow squall threatened, the way the support group grew, with new faces at every meeting, the way Ben, once timid and withdrawn, now raced out to meet the world, fearless with Max by his side. On a sunny afternoon, Jessica and Mike watched as Ben built a snow fort with half a dozen kids from the neighborhood. Max patrolled the perimeter, tail high, barking instructions as if he were the general of some grand campaign. Mike laughed, nudging Jessica. "You know, I think he's happier than he's ever been." Jessica smiled, a soft peace in her heart. "Me too. And you know what? I am too." She looked at Mike, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you for not letting me freeze out there, for showing me that hope is worth fighting for." Mike shook his head, his voice gentle. "It was Max who wouldn't give up. He reminded me why we fight. And you brought laughter back into this place. You reminded me that even after everything, life can be good again." Jessica leaned her head against his shoulder, the silence between them warm and full. As the sun dipped lower and the children's shouts echoed across the snow, she realized that the storm had changed them all, not just by forcing them together, but by reminding them what truly matters. That night, Jessica tucked Ben into bed. Max stretched out beside him. She paused in the doorway, watching her son's peaceful sleep, and whispered a prayer of thanks. For second chances, for kindness, for the courage to begin again. And in the hush of the cabin, surrounded by the people and dog who had become her family, Jessica understood the truth. Storms come and go, but the bonds forged in their midst can warm even the coldest winter. A few weeks after the storm, the cabin hummed with a gentle, newfound rhythm. Life had not miraculously become perfect. Bills still came, chores still needed doing, and sometimes old sadness would creep in like a shadow on the wall. But the ache in Jessica's chest, the cold fear that used to wake her in the dark, had faded into something softer, a memory, a lesson, but not a chain. On a Saturday morning, sunlight streamed through the windows. Ben's laughter bounced off the kitchen walls as he scrambled eggs with Mike, making a mess of the stove and proudly declaring himself the breakfast boss. Max sat at the table, tail thumping, watching every movement for a potential taste. Jessica sipped her coffee at the window, smiling as she watched Ben dart outside to play. The yard was still patchy with melting snow. Farther out, the woods gleamed, icicles sparkling like tiny chandeliers. Every now and then, she caught a glimpse of neighbors and friends, children playing, adults waving as they passed on their morning walks. The world was bigger now, full of faces she recognized, and all of it seemed to radiate a kind of light she'd almost forgotten. With breakfast finished and the dishes washed, Jessica felt a gentle nudge at her elbow. Mike stood beside her, holding his old camcorder. "You know," he said, "I've been thinking about telling our story. Maybe it would help someone else." Jessica hesitated, shyness pricking her cheeks. But then she remembered all the people who'd reached out. The widows, the parents, the lonely folks who'd told her their pain and courage. She nodded. If even one person feels less alone, it's worth it. They set up the camera on the hearth. Max flopped contentedly at Mike's feet, Ben visible in the background rolling a snowball for the start of a snowman. Jessica glanced at Mike, her nerves fluttering, but he smiled. Steady, reassuring, as always. Mike cleared his throat, staring into the lens. "If you're hearing this, I hope our story helps you, even a little. My name's Mike Anderson, and this is Max. That's Ben and Jessica outside. Family, the kind you fight to protect. A while back, I promised a friend I'd watch over his family if anything ever happened to him. Life took its turns, and I almost lost my way. But when a blizzard hit and I saw Jess and Ben out in the cold, I remembered. Loyalty doesn't mean much if you're not willing to act on it." He paused, voice steady but emotional. "This isn't just a story about surviving winter. It's about what happens when people, and sometimes a good dog, refuse to let each other freeze in sorrow. It's about how even the smallest act of kindness can start something bigger." Jessica leaned into the frame, adding quietly, "We lost a lot, but we found more than we ever expected. Courage, friendship, and a family that didn't look the way we thought it would, but was exactly what we needed. If you're listening and you're hurting, or lonely, or feel like nobody sees you, please know you're not alone. Sometimes the world is cold, but there are always people, sometimes even strangers, who want to help. Let them." She smiled, glancing at Mike and Max. "And if you have a loyal friend, on 2 legs or 4, give them a hug. You never know what a difference it might make." Mike leaned forward, voice soft. "If our story touched you, I hope you'll share your own, or leave a kind word below. Sometimes your story is the hope someone else needs. And if you want to hear more, feel free to like, comment, or subscribe. Every shared story makes the world a little warmer." He switched off the camera. There was a gentle quiet, the kind that came when something important had been spoken into the world. The rest of the day was spent outdoors, Ben and his friends building the biggest snowman of the season. Mike helped with the heavy lifting, Jessica handed out mittens and hot cocoa, and Max watched it all, proudly patrolling his territory. Later, as dusk settled over the cabin and the last of the sunlight turned the snow golden, Jessica stood by the fire with Mike and Ben. She felt the warmth of their presence, the glow of a life rebuilt not by accident, but by choices, by every small act of courage, every moment of trust, every refusal to give up. She looked at Ben, who seemed taller and more confident now, at Mike, who had traded solitude for the messy, joyful work of family, and at Max, whose loyalty had bridged every chasm of fear and doubt. For a moment, she thought of Daniel, of the love that had begun this journey, and whispered a quiet thank you. After dinner, as the wind picked up and snowflakes once again drifted past the window, Jessica tucked Ben into bed. He yawned, sleepy but content, Max already curled protectively at his feet. "Mom," Ben murmured, "do you think we'll have more adventures?" Jessica smiled, smoothing his hair. "Oh, I'm sure of it. Life always has more stories for us, especially when we stick together." She turned off the lamp, closing the door softly behind her, her heart peaceful. Mike met her in the living room, setting another log on the fire. They sat quietly for a while, watching the flames dance. Outside, the world was silent, blanketed once again in fresh snow. But inside, there was only warmth, the glow of love and hope. Jessica leaned her head on Mike's shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. He took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles. "Thank you, Jess, for letting me in, for reminding me that there's always light, even after the longest winter." They sat like that for a long time, the only sound the crackle of the fire and Max's steady breathing. And as the last coals faded and the cabin filled with soft darkness, Jessica knew that, whatever storms came, she would never face them alone again. Her story, their story, was just one among many. But it was enough to prove that even on the coldest days, the light we share can thaw the deepest snow, and that kindness, courage, and love will always find a way home.